Janet Albrechtsen is a columnist with The Australian. Janet, for 2 years now, Shane Drumgold, the former ACT Director of Public Prosecutions, has been pursuing a complaint against The Australian in the Australian Press Council. What is Shane Drumgold's problem?
That's a big question, Claire. But in the end, it's actually quite simple. He had a problem with 3 of our articles that we published, as you say, 2 years ago, so it's been going for 2 years. And he claims that we misrepresented the judgment of Justice Stephen Kay in the ACT Supreme Court.
Yeah, it's been a long and winding road to this decision by the Australian Press Council, but essentially Shane Drumgold objected to initially a finding by Commissioner Walter Sofronoff that criticised his conduct of the criminal prosecution against Bruce Lehrmann in the Brittany Higgins matter. That went to the ACT Supreme Court, where Justice Kay found that Walter Sofronoff's findings were right, that Shane Drumgold had got things wrong. But Shane Drumgold didn't want to accept that. What is the nub of this problem, though, Janet? Where is his critique of the way the Australian covered it?
The nub of the problem is, Claire, that after that judgment in the ACT Supreme Court, we wrote that we described his victory in that case as a Pyrrhic victory. I used those words, a Pyrrhic victory. And we laid out that, firstly, that Drumgold succeeded when he sought a declaration that there was an apprehension of bias in Walter Sofronoff's report because of conversations that he had with people in the media, including myself. He won there. If that was all that Shane Drumgold had sought from the ACT Supreme Court, it would have been a huge win for him, and we would have reported it as a huge win for him. But that's not all that he wanted. He wanted much more. He asked the ACT Supreme Court to declare that the findings by Walter Sofronoff were legally unreasonable. There were 8 findings that he wanted declared in that way, and he failed. 7 of those 8 findings were found by the judge in that case, by Justice Kay, not to be legally unreasonable. And we reported that. And the effect of not getting those declarations was that it was a Pyrrhic victory, as I wrote for Shane Drumgold, because 7 of the 8 findings by Walter Sofronoff were not struck down as legally invalid. They remained standing. That's what we wrote. It was accurate then. It's accurate now to say that. And that's what we've been fighting the Press Council over.
Yeah, so this matter went to the Press Council, where Shane Drumgold, as the complainant, was able to represent himself. Now, he is, of course, a silk. The Australian was not allowed to have legal representation at the Press Council. That's something that our editors have very strongly criticised in some stories that we've been running in the Australian, that essentially this behaved like a kangaroo court where one side was allowed to have legal representation and the other wasn't. You're a lawyer, Janet. What's your view of that?
That was just simply unfair. What it did was allow the Press Council, I think, to give more weight to the statements by someone, Shane Drumgold, who is a silk, but he's a criminal lawyer. He is not an expert in administrative law. So it was very frustrating for us that it just seemed that the Press Council did not want to look at this objectively. And Claire, the biggest mistake I think that the Press Council made was to get involved in what was absolutely a dispute about the legal interpretation of a judgment. They say that it wasn't, but of course it was. That's what we were fighting about.
The Australian went and commissioned opinions separately from 2 leading silks, Matthew Collins KC and Will Horton KC. They both returned with similar opinions that essentially the Australian's reporting of Justice Kay's findings were upheld. The Press Council was considering whether we had breached its first general principle. Let me just read that to you, Janet. It says, ensure that factual material in news reports and elsewhere is accurate and not misleading and is distinguishable from other material such as opinion. Now, you write opinion, you also write news. You're a lawyer, but you're also a journalist, so I think you're a good person to ask about this. The Press Council found that we did breach General Principle 1, and now Shane Drumgold, would consider that, I think, to be a victory over the Australian. We now have to publish the Press Council's adjudication. What's your sense of that finding, and what's your response to the suggestion that we haven't been accurate or clear or fair?
We take accuracy incredibly seriously. And that general principle, number one, about accuracy, is at the heart of what we do. We were correct in our interpretation of the Kay judgment 2 years ago. This is where the Press Council got itself into such a tangle, Claire, because this was a legal Barney, and it was all laid out in the judgment. You literally had to look at the declaration, the orders that Shane Drumgold got. He did not get the ones that he needed to restore his reputation. So we were correct back then 2 years ago. And the unfortunate thing, I think, Claire, really, and I say this very genuinely, is that Mr. Drumgold has now secured the second Pyrrhic victory, because here we are again explaining, because we believe in accuracy and defending ourselves because we believe in accuracy, we are going through those devastating findings that Sofronow made against Shane Drumgold, and that Justice Kay said were not legally unreasonable. And Justice Kay went through these forensically. I don't understand how the Press Council could have got it so wrong. I can understand the motivations of Shane Drumgold. It was a terrible fall from grace. He lost his job as chief prosecutor in the ACT. I don't understand how the Press Council could possibly get it so wrong.
One thing that I think everyone can agree that Drumgold did have a win on is Justice Kay's finding that a layperson might reasonably have apprehended that Walter Sofronow, the Commissioner, might have been influenced by your views in determining the issues of the inquiry. Now, when I read the communications between you and Walter Sofronow, I see a journalist doing her job, seeking information, developing a source relationship with someone. That's all, of course, been exposed throughout these various legal processes. How has that felt for you as a journalist to have your communications with a source revealed like that?
Well, of course, I would prefer not to have any communications revealed with a source, because I take confidentiality incredibly serious. But, as a person who was there when it happened, let me tell you just one thing about this, and that is, two things. The first is that we absolutely understood that Walter Sofronow's motivation in speaking to members of the press, me being one of them, was that he wanted the press to report accurately, in a timely way and thoroughly. And frankly, Claire, a lot of the media had not been that interested in other aspects of what I call the Higgins-Lerman saga, except through the prism of it being Australia's Me Too movement moment. But there was so much more to it, as Sofronow and his counsel assisting had exposed during that inquiry, through long sessions cross-examining Mr. Drumgold himself. It was all laid out. That was what was at the core of Mr. Sofronow speaking with me. But the other thing, Claire, we have to remember, to be fair both to, I think, to Mr. Sofronow and to the entire process, is that we're talking about an apprehended bias, not an actual one. The notion that I could have influenced Sofronow's views is laughable. I was listening, I was asking questions, that I was doing what I was meant to do. But as a matter of law, Shane Drumgold absolutely won a declaration that the report was infected by an apprehension of bias. As I said, if he had only stopped there, Claire, he would have had a win. But he went much further, and that's where he got into all sorts of strife.
Do you think there's a misunderstanding in the legal system about the way journalists do work or should work, and about the level of contact they should have or are allowed to have with judicial officers, for example?
I think they operate in this very unreal world where these communications, they see them as inherently untoward. And they're not necessarily that at all. There was nothing untoward going on, but unfortunately, at law they are, and that's the sort of that's where the law, I think, sometimes loses a connection with what actually happens in practice.
Zooming out right back to the entirety of this saga, Brittany Higgins accused Bruce Lerman of raping her. That accusation was upheld on the balance of probabilities in the federal court, and Bruce Lerman has lost on appeal there. This is about a young woman claiming that she had been raped, and then so many things spun off from that. Allegations of political conspiracy, the destruction of different people's reputations, defamation cases, and now a press council Barney. Overall, Janet, where has this whole saga left Australia and, as you mentioned, the idea of a Me Too moment?
I think the Me Too part of it stopped a long time ago. It became, as I said earlier, just so much more than that. And Claire, I keep wondering, well, I don't wonder, but I keep thinking to myself, gosh, when does it ever finish? And it went on for so long because so many people made terrible decisions along the way. Many smart people made really terrible decisions. And it ended off shooting down in all over the place. We had different chapters here, as you say, a litany of litigation. The cost to taxpayers has been enormous. But at its core, it's because a number of people who should have known better made very bad decisions. And unfortunately for Mr. Drumgold, he was one of them.
Janet Albrechtsen, thank you very much.
Thank you.